The story begins with the appearance of a man in a red coat, his proud blonde hair flowing, followed by a woman dressed in white, with a blindfold covering her left eye. She slowly descends with a calm expression, then activates her power. White smoke swirls around her, enveloping her entirely until she transforms into a terrifying figure with glowing red eyes. Yet her voice remains adorably cute. Explosions erupt from all directions, turning the atmosphere into something ominous. In a nearby valley, a blonde-haired man and a six-armed woman, each of her arms equipped with 3 steel limbs, meet. They greet each other as if it has been a long time since they last met, but a fierce battle soon erupts between them. Strike after strike, the loud clangs of Ragna's sword clash against the woman's metal limbs in rapid succession. Ragna parries every attack with his massive blade. Even though his opponent is a woman, Ragna the Blood Edge, known as the Grim Reaper, shows no mercy. The woman leaps into the air, but Ragna presses a button on his hand, disabling her metal limbs instantly. In a single swift motion, he drives his enormous sword through her body. Blood trickles from the right corner of Ragna's lips. The woman smiles and softly says, "That was fun, and now we can finally be together, Ragna," as she wraps her arms around him. The next moment, both of them fall from a high cliff, the sword still pierced through her body. From afar, a man watches the battle unfold, clearly enjoying the spectacle. The scene shifts to show Ragna stumbling weakly, as if drained of all energy, his wide sword sheathed neatly on his back. As he walks with heavy steps, explosions continue to go off on either side of his path. He glances at them and sighs in exhaustion. With determined steps, he moves forward while surveying the aftermath of the previous night's battle. Suddenly, dark blue smoke begins to rise from his metal hand, right near the red button. Ragna clicks his tongue in irritation, muttering, "Damn it." As he eyes the smoke, a girl with braided blonde hair appears before him. Beside her is a red creature with tiny bat-like wings. The blonde girl holds a red umbrella and wears an outfit that accentuates her beauty. Teasing Ragna, she jokes about how dull he looks. Ragna, now more annoyed, growls. The girl spins and closes her umbrella, then swiftly smacks the tiny red-winged creature toward Ragna. In a blur, Ragna turns and catches the creature with one hand. The girl lands beside him with a pout on her face. Ragna begins to choke the red creature, making it cry out in pain. The creature, known as Gi, pleads that it hurts, but the blonde girl, who is actually a princess, ignores it and instead starts talking about Medusho, the magic of the BlazBlue world. She compliments Ragna and says he's actually a kind person. Ragna, now irritated, yells and demands to know what her purpose is in stopping him. The blonde girl raises her umbrella and points toward the direction of Kagutsuchi City. She tells Ragna to go there. Hearing the name of the city, Ragna scoffs and mocks it, asking why he should go to such a low-class place like Kagutsuchi. He threatens that if he does go, he'll only end up destroying it. Just as he finishes speaking, he realizes that the red bat, Gi, and the blonde girl have both vanished. The girl is Rachel Alucard, a proud vampire princess who often appears in the form of an umbrella. She can transform her umbrella into the lobelia cannon or a comfortable chair. The red creature beside her is Gi, a bat-like familiar who often suffers under Rachel's whims, whether serving her tea, being used as a footrest, or having his cheeks pinched when she's annoyed. Ragna glances toward the direction of Kagutsuchi and begins making his way there. The scene shifts once more, revealing a man in a black hat with green hair, smiling with a sense of amusement. Beside him stood Rachel, calmly listening to what the green-haired man was saying. He commented that Ragna seemed rather entertaining, but Rachel dismissed the remark, stating he was merely speaking based on appearances. The man brushed off her comment, explaining that he didn't have much time and couldn't leave his current location. With both hands tucked confidently in his pockets, he stood proudly. Rachel glanced at him indifferently and advised him to behave appropriately in that place. The man acknowledged her advice and then let out a mocking laugh. Footsteps echoed as someone calmly approached, holding a document folder in hand. Wearing a blue cap that allowed some of her short blonde hair to peek through, her weak green eyes fixed forward as she gently knocked on a door, taking a quiet breath. She was Lieutenant Noelle Vermillion. After being granted permission to enter, she stepped through the door and handed the brown envelope to Major Kisaragi, the former lieutenant of the Novice Orbis Librarium, now assigned to summon Jean to that very post. Inside, a blonde-haired man sat reading a letter when Noelle approached. Though his attention was on the letter, his eyes briefly flicked toward the envelope. He snatched it from her with a rough motion, noticing a seal, a charm, on the envelope's flap. Major Kisaragi immediately recognized it as a classified document. He closed his eyes and activated his power to release the seal. A light blue mist swirled around the document as Noel silently observed. The envelope unraveled into a single piece of paper, and as Major Kisaragi began to read, just seconds later, his expression turned into one of surprise, mirrored by Noel herself. Ragna. That one word made Noel tremble on the spot. Ragna the Blood Edge. Kisaragi continued, his face spreading into a wide grin. He seemed overjoyed, in contrast to the still stunned Noel. With clear excitement, Kisaragi burst into laughter. Confused by his reaction, Noel could only stare, while Kisaragi gave her a confident smirk and declared he knew Ragna was in Kagutsuchi. Rising from his seat, he walked toward her and firmly ordered her to step aside. With teary eyes, Noel watched his back as he left the room, the door slamming shut behind him with a loud thud. Striding away with confident steps, Kisaragi's green eyes glinted with ambition as he chuckled to himself under his breath. The next scene reveals a peaceful city, people walking through the streets without a hint of trouble. Various wanted posters are posted around, but one stood out, the infamous Ragna the Blood Edge, with a bounty of 90 billion. Ragna himself walked through the city, carefully scanning his surroundings. Everything seemed normal. This was, indeed, Kagutsuchi, just as Rachel had pointed out earlier. Ragna entered a dim, narrow alley that gave off a faintly ominous vibe. After a few steps, he stopped, surprised to see a body lying on the ground. He frowned, cleared his throat, and attempted to walk past. But suddenly, a hand clutched his leg. It was smiling. With glowing red eyes, the creature looked ravenous. In an instant, it leapt toward Ragna, craving his flesh, clearly starving. With a wild shout, it launched a punch, a Tauka-style strike. But Ragna swiftly blocked it, creating a cloud of dust that enveloped the creature. When the dust settled, it lay defeated on the ground, motionless. It turned out the creature was one of the Kaka clan. Before it could finish its sentence, a loud stomach growl echoed. Desperately, it pleaded that it wasn't looking to fight. It was just really hungry. Ragna let out an annoyed sigh and glanced sideways. He ended up bringing the creature to a local eatery, buying it a bowl of hot ramen. Shamelessly, the red-eyed being devoured multiple bowls of ramen, and other dishes too. Its name was Takaka. As they chatted, Takaka asked if Ragna would join her on her quest to find Ragna, the most wanted man of all. As thanks, she offered to split the bounty reward with him. Ragna was left speechless. He couldn't believe that she didn't recognize him at all. Then, Takaka pulled out a sketch of Ragna, an utterly awful drawing. Takaka rubbed her belly and said it was time for a nap, while Ragna hadn't even finished his bowl of ramen. She said she loved sleeping under the sunlight. She called Ragna Nyasu in her usual quirky tone. On a grassy field, two young men could be seen, one lying down while the other sat and stared ahead. A girl was leaning against a tree, and then a young man waved at her. Apparently, it was one of Ragna's memories. He seemed irritated by the memory and suddenly slammed the table, startling Takaka. He then got up and walked out of the restaurant, even though Takaka kept calling him and asked him to stay a little longer. Ragna looked at the red button in his hand, and suddenly, his memory took him back to an event where he met a talking cat. The cat explained that Ragna hadn't yet fully obtained the power of the Azure Grimoire. With his two distinct eyes, Ragna stared at the creature, his master. At a harbor crowded with many ships, a massive vessel bore the emblem of two golden wings above its open entrance. From the steps at the ship's entrance, someone descended. It was Lieutenant Noel. She had finally arrived in the 13th city, Kagutsuchi. Near the ship's entrance stood a man in a black hat, the same man who had spoken with Rachel. The man cracked a joke at Lieutenant Noel. He looked excited and full of energy. He was Captain Hazama, a captain in the Novice Orbis Library's intelligence department. In truth, his real name was Yuki Terumi. Yuki calmly reassured the somewhat panicked Lieutenant Noel. He got incredibly close to her face, barely an inch away, and asked whether she was still part of the reconnaissance unit or not. Lieutenant Noel quickly answered yes. She looked visibly uncomfortable, worried about being impolite, but Yuki told her to simply call him Hazama. As he walked away, Lieutenant Noel watched him with a quiet, reflective gaze. Yuki instructed her to carry out her mission and bring the designated target to headquarters, and not to lose to Kisaragi. Lieutenant Noel nodded and followed behind Hazama, walking beside the green-haired man. Hazama remarked that the surveillance level in Kagutsuchi was currently at grade D. Noel reported that some organizations and Grim Reapers had attacked the city, but were repelled by Ragna the Blood Edge. Hazama turned and asked if her superiors had reported the Grim Reaper incident. Noel hesitated for a moment, but then quickly responded yes. She also stated that direct contact should be avoided. Yuki Hazama then stepped into an iron-gated lift, saying he'd meet her again later at the Kagetsuchi office. Lieutenant Noel looked around before walking off, but from above, Hazama watched her with a mysterious smile on his face. The scene shifted to Takaka, casually strolling among a crowd. Ragna, beside her, clearly disliked her noisy behavior. Apparently, she had been following him, much to his annoyance. Takaka hopped around playfully, not realizing the man before her was the Blood Edge himself. Sure enough, the red button on Ragna's hand glowed again as thick navy blue smoke emerged. Ragna glared at her, warning her to stop touching his arm. He told Takaka not to follow him, but she looked confused by his behavior, wondering if Ragna was scared. After walking for some time, Ragna finally realized Takaka was no longer following him. He decided to rest for a while. As he lay down, he recalled what Rachel and his master had told him. Ragna now understood that there was a way to control it. While he was lying down and cooling his thoughts, Lieutenant Noel arrived and found him resting. Ragna was in pain, lost again in his memories, visions of himself and a young girl. He called her name, Saya. But before he could reach her, a bright orange light overwhelmed his sight, and everything turned into a sea of flames. Ragna saw Saya standing motionless with another man beside her. Then, he realized, his right arm had been severed, blood pouring endlessly. He awoke from that painful memory, and the first thing he saw was Lieutenant Noel. Ragna stood up, staring intently at Lieutenant Noel's face. It resembled Saya, the girl from his dreams. Anger flared within him as he demanded to know who she was and why she was here. Calmly, Noel tried to ease his fury, stepping closer and gently placing a hand on his forehead. She noted he might have a fever and suggested he see a doctor. She offered to take him, but as she accidentally touched Ragna's right arm, a sudden burst of blue smoke erupted from it. Reacting instinctively, Ragna shoved her violently to the ground and stormed off. Noel could only watch as he walked away. Meanwhile, Ragna was still shaken by his encounters with these strange people. He questioned whether every soul in this place was just an empty vessel. As he paused mid-step, a voice suddenly rang out. On guard, Ragna readied himself for battle, and then saw Jean Kisaragi. Their eyes met. It was Jean, the very one present when Ragna lost his arm. The one who severed it. Fueled by rage, Ragna lunged with fierce determination. Their swords clashed, ringing out with an explosive metallic echo. After leaping back from each other, Jean smirked, clearly relishing the moment. Ragna declared he would beat Jean down, but Jean, unwilling to yield, proposed they just kill each other already. He hurled a massive shard of blue crystal at Ragna, who sliced through it with a single blow. Jin's ice powers could freeze anything, but Ragna evaded him, leaping back as Jean smiled even wider, enjoying every second. Jean dashed forward to stab Ragna from behind, but Ragna parried in a flash. Jin's blade came dangerously close to cutting him, but Ragna batted it away and leapt back again. Jean, amused, taunted Ragna's strength, saying it was still lacking and that this was fun. After all, he was Ragna's younger brother. Jean attacked relentlessly, wild and unhinged, while Ragna dodged desperately. Pushed past his limit, Ragna snapped. The red button on his arm lit up, and black smoke engulfed the area. Jean was stunned. With a crushing blow, Ragna launched Jean skyward, following up with a brutal flurry of strikes. Jean lay defeated on the ground, writhing in pain. Still conscious, he asked what had gotten into his brother. Didn't Ragna want to finish this? But Ragna coldly responded that Jean wasn't the reason he came to this city, and told him to just die on his own. Elsewhere, Lieutenant Noel and Captain Yuki Hazama had arrived at a new location. Hazama was certain Ragna was nearby. As they walked, they eventually came across Jin's unconscious body. But Hazama paid it no mind. His thoughts were consumed only with finding Ragna. Concerned for Jean, Noel offered to go search for Ragna and told Hazama to stay behind and watch over him. She walked away, determined to find him. But after just a few steps, she turned back, only to find that Hazama had already vanished. Meanwhile, Ragna had descended to a lower level. As he walked, his body suddenly froze, seized by an unseen force. In front of him, a figure emerged. Ragna recalled Rachel's words. Fear, emotion, and dread of death were not victory. Taking a fighting stance, he demanded to know who this was. The figure replied. He was the one who would destroy Ragna. This being claimed to be empty, a sword, forged in steel. He said the blade he wielded would slice through Ragna's sins and put an end to his actions. His name was Hakumen. The being known as Hakumen declared that he would destroy Ragna. Ragna glared at Hakumen with an annoyed expression. He had just intended to leave the area, only to run into Hakumen. Hakumen drew his sword from his back and, with a powerful stomp, rushed forward and struck Ragna. Not one to back down, Ragna quickly parried the relentless strikes of Hakumen's blade. Though he kept blocking and dodging, Ragna was gradually being pushed back, while Hakumen stood firm and unshaken. Hakumen struck Ragna's face and punched him in the stomach, sending the man flying. Hakumen then looked down at Ragna, who now lay unconscious on the ground, dust swirling around the battlefield. Ragna glared up at Hakumen as he mocked him, questioning whether this weakened man could really be the infamous Grim Reaper. Seeing Ragna collapse so easily, Hakumen deemed him unworthy. Slowly, Ragna began to rise and told Hakumen to shut up. Elsewhere, Rachel was staring quietly into a teapot filled with rose tea. She seemed already aware of the situation. Ragna clutched his aching chest. The red button on his hand was still functioning normally. He paused, wondering why his attacks had no effect on Hakumen. Meanwhile, Hakumen stated that Ragna's powers were useless against his sword. Bright blue mist surrounded Hakumen's body as he prepared to fulfill his mission to destroy Ragna. Raising his blade high, he summoned the winds and unleashed all his strength. Then, he called forth Bakaniko. In another location, someone was operating a series of computers, analyzing the battle between Hakumen and Ragna. It was a pink-haired girl supporting her chin, skeptical that Hakumen could actually finish Ragna off. Hakumen yelled furiously for her not to interfere. The pink-haired girl warned of a dangerous phenomenon, advising Ragna to retreat. His powers wouldn't bring victory. But Ragna ignored her. Still full of defiant optimism, he even threatened her not to mess with people's minds so freely. A golden ring of light enveloped Hakumen's body, enhancing his power even more. The computers near the pink-haired girl sparked and shut down instantly. Hakumen stepped forward, cracking the ground beneath him. Ragna stared at Hakumen's increasingly empowered form. With no other choice, he decided to activate his shield, Rebellion, his dimensional countermeasure. He pressed the red button on his right hand, which was now engulfed in dark blue mist. With a fierce glare, he prepared to obliterate Hakumen. Dark purple smoke enveloped Ragna's body as he growled that the 666 seals had been released. He demanded the infernal dimension to open. A glowing, arcane circle formed between his feet with incomprehensible markings. The BlazBlue was now active. Both Yuki Terumi and Lieutenant Noel Vermilion sensed that something was terribly wrong. Ragna dashed forward, mocking Hakumen as a damn iron-masked freak. Meanwhile, Yuki remained beside Jean, guarding his unconscious body. Jean still lay motionless, blood trailing from the corner of his lips. Dust clouds billowed across the battlefield. With renewed power, Ragna slashed mercilessly at Hakumen, strike after strike. A ferocious battle erupted between the two. Meanwhile, Rachel walked gracefully across a field of vibrant red flowers. She gazed at one fresh bloom and commented that this was just the beginning. In fact, she claimed to have seen worse than this unfold before. Back in another area, Noelle continued walking, trusting her instincts to find Ragna. She felt she was getting closer. She opened a door behind which shone a blinding light and saw a massive object she felt she'd seen before. Yuki Terumi, entering a different location, was filled with unease, unsure of the path he had chosen. Rachel, ever watchful, waited patiently for what was yet to come. The blue light from Ragna's iron arm continued to shine brightly, signaling that the battle was far from over. Blow after blow rained down from Hakumen, and Ragna struggled to defend himself against the relentless onslaught. At last, Ragna managed to push Hakumen back, creating a momentary opening. Lieutenant Noel watched the scene unfold, a sense of familiarity tugging at her mind. She felt she had seen this place before, but couldn't remember when or where. As she stepped back cautiously, a thick, dark blue mist slowly began to swirl around her, creeping closer until it entered her left eye. In that moment, Noelle began to identify the subject before her. A massive stone suddenly collapsed, revealing a figure bathed in blinding white light. From the glow emerged a girl, the same red-eyed warrior who had fought Ragna earlier. Meanwhile, Hazama observed the situation with obvious delight, his usual sly grin plastered on his face as he reveled in the chaos. Elsewhere, Rachel, still standing amidst a field of red flowers, softly remarked that the story was far from over. Back on the battlefield, the fierce clash between Ragna and Hakumen continued. Their powers collided, Hakumen's light blue aura and Ragna's purple energy, forming a vivid fusion of force. With a fierce roar and eyes ablaze, Ragna charged forward, matched by Hakumen's own advance. The two collided with such impact that a thick white cloud of smoke enveloped the area. Noelle then activated the Murakumo unit, identifying the girl before her as a similar type of unit. She asked who the girl was. The girl stared back with a calm yet merciless gaze and responded coldly, declaring herself as Prime Field Device Number 12, an anti-sanctions unit, and demanding an explanation. Noelle answered, stating that she was Prime Field Device Number 13, also an anti-sanctions unit. Nu 13, who was also Lieutenant Noelle, pressed her palm against Nu 12's. Nu calmly declared that the subject was unidentified and suggested immediate self-destruction. However, the suggestion was overridden, prioritizing continuity of existence. Seeking a response, Nu attempted unauthorized contact with a similar unit and quickly confirmed the subject as a target marked for elimination. Without delay, the elimination protocol commenced. Lieutenant Noelle leapt backward, her tranquil green eyes glowing as she activated her signature power, Bulwark. A dense white mist erupted, followed by dazzling green energy as she drew her twin rectangular pistols, exuding an air of fierce charisma. Across from her, Nu 12 stared with an empty expression. As the smoke thickened, Nu 12 underwent a transformation, her red eyes burning bright as she launched a sudden attack. The clash intensified. Nu 13 fired repeatedly with her pistols while Nu 12 countered with her own brutal strength. Explosions echoed through the air as Nu 12 swiftly closed the distance, striking Noelle hard and sending her crashing into a jagged rock wall. Dust filled the space, and Noelle winced in pain. From afar, she noticed something, 6 long metallic rods, 3 on each side, protruding from the girl's back. She questioned what she was doing, as if suddenly regaining awareness. Blinking, Noelle noticed something strange in her hand. Before she could get up, a large rock nearly struck her, but she narrowly dodged it with a leap. She still couldn't comprehend what was happening to her. It felt as if something was controlling her actions, forcing her to fire at the enemy without pause. Her rapid shots filled the battlefield with thick smoke, but Nu 12 effortlessly dodged them, leaping higher and hurling metal plates at Noelle. Yet Noelle remained locked in, her hands never ceasing their barrage of gunfire toward Nu 12. Nu 12 leapt forward and kicked toward Nu 13 with swift precision, but Nu 13 agilely dodged the attack and retaliated with gunfire. Nu 12 collapsed, helpless, her clothes torn in several places. Lieutenant Noelle gasped, slightly shocked by what had just happened. Nu 12, still conscious, ordered the assault on the target to continue. Taking position, Lieutenant Noelle prepared herself and continuously fired bullet after bullet at Nu 12. Yet, the red-eyed girl evaded every shot. From her green eyes, Nu 13 appeared deeply anxious, wondering why her opponent wasn't going down. Bullet after bullet rained toward Nu 12 as Nu 13 fired with increasing desperation. Nu 13 screamed for her to stay away, but it was too late. Noelle had already fallen to the ground, holding both her pistols, stunned by what was happening. Nu 12 began reconnecting her unit and released petals into the air. A glowing blue circle appeared behind her back. Noelle paused, her mind clouded with the thought that she might die. In that moment, a memory surged back, 3 young girls sitting on green grass, sharing food. One had long flowing red hair, another short blonde hair, and a warm smile. They looked so close, so familiar. Then, in a tall tower, a girl was reading a book when a young boy called out to her. That girl was Lieutenant Noelle. She blinked, slowly realizing. She was Saya, the younger sister of Jean and Ragna. Nu 12 stood there, eyes glowing crimson, with 3 long metallic blades floating beside her. To Noelle, death seemed inevitable, haunted by her memories of the boy calling her name, and of when she touched Ragna's forehead, something sparked within her. From a blue light, something emerged, but Nu 12 gave the command, eliminate Lieutenant Noelle. The sound of blades slicing through the air terrified Noelle to her core. She clenched her eyes shut and buried her face in fear. Yet, the attack never landed. Her eyes snapped open to find Ragna, shielding her with his own body. She stared at him, unable to believe it, tears welling in her eyes. Looking down at her trembling hands, she questioned why she missed Ragna so deeply. Suddenly, Ragna replied, it should be him asking that question. He then asked why Lieutenant Noelle was here, as if he didn't want her involved in this mess. Noelle was stunned by his words. Her tears spilled over, falling freely. Meanwhile, Nu 12 greeted Ragna in her sickeningly sweet voice, recalling their last battle in Akitsu. Ragna, clearly annoyed, gave a half-hearted response. Nu 12 teased, asking if he would kill her again. Ragna responded bluntly. He wasn't here to kill her. He was here to destroy her. Still in her flirtatious tone, Nu 12 said she was created for Ragna alone. She claimed to hate everyone but him, and that she needed no one else. Ragna looked at her with visible disgust. Undeterred, Nu, 12 continued taunting him, saying their battle hadn't left much of an impact on her, mocking that Ragna had suddenly stabbed her. She thought she was going to die. Ragna demanded that she shut up, but she pressed on, asking if it felt good. Startled, Ragna froze. Nu, 12 went on about being slashed and pierced, tortured before she could even speak or resist. Again, Ragna told her to be silent, but she wouldn't stop. She claimed today was different. She now had her perfect form, and finally, she could talk to him. Ragna shouted louder, demanding Nu to be silent. He could no longer bear the voice and words of the crazed girl. Nu responded by saying that she and Ragna were alike, just like herself. Ragna wanted to destroy her, destroy Nu, destroy himself, and destroy the world. Nu claimed that Ragna's true desire was to annihilate everything until nothing remained. She invited Ragna to destroy everything with her, believing that by doing so, they could be together forever. Ragna was reminded. She was one of the girls who had appeared alongside the other 3 earlier, a shadow of Lieutenant Noel. Nu insisted that Ragna would never be alone again. Shock overtook Ragna's face as she continued, saying he would never feel loneliness again. Beautiful words, yet like thorns they pierce the heart, deeper and deeper, until there is no escape. Ragna would be dragged into the flow of time, and what awaited him would be an unchanging end. Those were the words of Rachel Alucard as she stared at a rosebud yet to bloom. Nu reached out with one of her steel arms, calling to Ragna. She wanted to make him hers. However, her relentless metallic assaults were parried one after another by Ragna. He didn't need anyone. One of Nu's weapons nearly struck Lieutenant Noel, but Ragna intervened just in time, blocking it. The weapons in both of Noel's hands slowly vanished as she collapsed. Ragna looked at her briefly before turning his attention back to Nu. From the opposite side, a swift kick from Nu landed squarely on Ragna, knocking him down. She stood upright, with 6 steel blades extending outward from her sides. Then, blue rings of light began forming behind her, encircling her body. Ragna also rose to his feet and observed this, gripping and rotating his sword in preparation. The scene shifted to Yuki, who was watching the sparks fly from the clashing strikes, visibly enjoying every moment. Ragna leapt forward rapidly, and Nu too charged in a wild frenzy, unleashing her full power. The two collided in a fierce battle while Noel remained unconscious. Both eventually landed and stared at each other. Nu let out a giggle, her expression twisted with delight. She said she wanted to embrace Ragna. Ragna, stunned by her words, became confused. He saw Saya in Nu's face. He asked what was truly going on, stepping back in a daze, unable to control himself. As he stumbled backward, filled with emotion, Ragna let out a loud roar and lunged at Nu in fury. At the same time, Nu dashed toward him with all her might. Her metallic blade struck at him, but to counter the attack, Ragna used his sword to pierce Nu's body, twice. The girl was impaled by his blade. Nu gently placed her hand on Ragna's face and laughed joyfully, despite the injury. Ragna, on the other hand, looked furious. Nu told him she was happy, because now they could be together. But then, from behind, another metal blade stabbed into Ragna's back. Blood sprayed from his mouth as he gasped. In that embrace, Ragna had been impaled. Meanwhile, Yuki observed the clash from within the darkness, silently recalling Rachel's words, that the end would always remain the same. A repetitive and cliched tale, like a puppet show doomed to replay forever. Nu clung tightly to Ragna, consumed by the ecstasy of their embrace, yearning to merge even deeper with him. Her long tail pierced Ragna's body, fresh blood spurting out violently. Ragna, however, detested the sensation and glared at Nu with visible anger. At the same time, Noel, weakened and exhausted, slowly opened her eyes and saw the two locked in a tight embrace. Nu asked why Ragna couldn't feel the same pleasure she did. Without hesitation, she released Seal 666, activating a dimensional interference field. A glowing blue circle emerged behind her, soon joined by multiple others. Nu had activated the Murakumo unit. Ragna, overwhelmed, could do nothing but curse, ultimately repeating Nu's words as he too released and activated the dimensional interference field. The BlazBlue ignited, blood spilled from his mouth. Nu stated that although Ragna's current body couldn't handle it yet, he was close, just a little more. They stared into each other's eyes as Nu told him to go ahead and rampage all he wanted. She would always be there to support him. Watching them, Noel muttered that they would become monsters who would destroy the world. Ragna looked at Nu and responded that he would do just that, because he, too, was done with the world. He would destroy everything. Nu gazed deeply into Ragna's eyes, while Yuki observed everything from afar. At the edge of the cliff, Ragna slowly moved his body. They were still in an embrace. Suddenly, Noelle dashed forward, desperate to save Ragna. She didn't want this to happen. Ragna turned briefly toward Noelle and saw her running toward him, yelling at him not to leave. A blinding white light engulfed Ragna's vision. His mind drifted back to a time under the shade of a large tree, resting peacefully beside his little sister, Saya. In that memory, he asked Saya if she was all right, or if she had fought with Jean again. He could see Saya's lips moving, but he couldn't hear what she was saying. The words were lost to him. He felt tired, so unbearably sleepy. Saya's voice then pierced through the haze, telling him not to give up. Ragna opened his eyes and turned toward her, shocked, just as Noelle screamed for him not to give up. He reached out his hand to Noelle, and their fingers locked. A burst of brilliant blue light radiated between them, dazzling their surroundings. Noelle was stunned, and so was Nu, who stood behind Ragna. Nu was forcefully separated from Ragna's body and collapsed to the ground. Elsewhere, Rachel watched in disbelief. She hadn't anticipated this turn of events, while Yuki smiled in satisfaction at what he witnessed. Noelle, still tightly holding Ragna's hand, slowly pulled his weakened body away from the cliff's edge. She looked at him, breathless and fragile, then began to cry. She asked why things had to come to this, calling herself a fool again and again through her tears. Slowly, Ragna arose and weakly asked Noelle to call him a fool. Surprised, Noelle turned to him, both hands covering her mouth. Ragna, his voice softened, apologized to her. Noelle's body trembled as she suddenly threw her arms around him, sobbing uncontrollably. Ragna winced in pain. Though she kept pounding his chest, she froze when her hands touched the wound from Nu's piercing strike. She quickly stood up and apologized, saying she would find someone who could heal him. She then ran off in a hurry, leaving Ragna behind, who was left confused by her actions. Meanwhile, Rachel gently floated upward toward the red sun and drifted off course. She appeared before Ragna and, with a smirk, thanked him for putting on such a fascinating performance. Ragna asked Rachel who she was, and Rachel replied that she was the new I. Ragna didn't understand what that meant, but Rachel explained that she was the heir to the true nirvana, the calamity trigger. Unlike Ragna's imitation, she said, she would inherit the real nirvana. The halted flow of time would soon begin moving once more, though even Rachel admitted she didn't know where that current would lead. Still, she was eagerly awaiting it. Ragna, however, had no idea what she was talking about. He demanded a proper explanation. Rachel seemed surprised by his words and quietly muttered that he came and then vanished just like that, before disappearing herself. Left alone, Ragna stared at his metal arm, doubting his power. Could it really be nothing more than an imitation? He couldn't bring himself to believe it. At that moment, Noelle arrived, carrying some medicine in her hands. Ragna looked at her and, in his heart, admitted to himself, she looked so much like Saya, his younger sister. The scene begins with Rachel gazing toward a distant star. She softly whispers, inviting it to come forth and partake in her game. That star was none other than the archenemy Highlander, Take Mikazuchi. A satellite slowly reveals itself, and a massive door opens. Rachel releases the nulliplex restraint mechanism, creating a dimensional interference of imaginary numbers. Light floods the area as a terrifying red entity emerges from the satellite's gate, opening its monstrous mouth to absorb all surrounding power. Meanwhile, Rachel connects to the congenital border and activates the Ceponime unit. At its peak, the two colossal forces clash. The impact of their power shatters the ground, scattering debris and clouds of dust into the sky. Rachel coldly remarks that it's pointless. Even she cannot penetrate the absolute defense of Ceponime. As the sky clears, the swirling energy vanishes and the red entity retreats back into its prison, the doors sealing shut once more. Rachel mutters that the beast will require another 4 years before it can fire again. She gently commands it to sleep until then, and returns home. The scene shifts. The ground trembles again. Ragna is still weak, seated on the ground as Noelle hears her name called in shock. It is Yuki, who appears and asks Noelle to look into his eyes. A flash of light nearly causes Yuki to stumble, but he laughs in delight, declaring he has finally made her see him. Ragna growls in frustration, calling Yuki a bastard. In response, Hazama, Yuki's other self, confidently removes his hat, smirking, calling Ragna nothing but a coward. Within Yuki's vision, he sees Saya, himself, and Ragna. Ragna roars his name in rage, Terumi. Though still injured, Yuki's taunts ignite Ragna's fury. He draws his sword and charges at him. Suddenly, Rachel steps in, urging him to stop, warning that the timeline has already shifted and that Ragna stands no chance of winning this time. Ragna shouts in defiance and leaps, attacking Hazama, but the green-haired man dodges swiftly, leaving behind only thick dust and his fallen hat. Yuki unleashes his Ouroboros technique, forming a glowing green circle that fires toward Ragna. Stones explode, dust swirls violently. Noelle loses her balance, but Rachel quickly catches her. Everyone is thrown back. Ragna lies in pain. Yuki sneers, mocking Ragna's weakness and repeating the same insults. Ragna, gritting his teeth, calls Hazama a bastard. Yuki grins, saying he's losing interest in the fight, but Ragna still tries to stop Terumi. Noelle, confused, asks what just happened, but Rachel asks her instead, "Did you look into Hazama's eyes?" Rachel warns her that now Hazama is aware of her. Noelle doesn't understand. Yuki calmly walks away, places his black hat back on his head, and smiles faintly. Elsewhere, a dark-haired girl named Linhua stares into a small jar. She remarks on how strong the tremor was to a doctor named Lychee. The doctor turns, "Yes, it's Lychee Fei Ling," and asks what might have caused it. Curious, Linhua rushes out to see for herself, but Lychee quickly follows, telling her to stop. In the distance, many people gather, looking toward a mountain shrouded in thick mist. Smoke pours from an unknown source. Suddenly, Rachel and Noelle appear, followed soon after by Ragna. Rachel speaks to Kokono, saying he has returned. A voice responds, confirming what she sees. Noelle asks who it is. The voice speaks again, asking if Ragna and Noelle can also hear it. Kokono sees it clearly, and she doesn't care. In fact, she's been waiting for this. She wants to erase someone's existence from the world. Rachel warns her to stay calm and act with dignity, but Kokono brushes it off. Noelle holds her head in confusion. Rachel then gently tells Ragna to rest for a while, for the sake of himself and both of them. Without another word, Rachel vanishes. Noelle stands there, stunned by her disappearance. The world keeps turning, and everything moves along with it. The unchanging end has faded, making way for a new dawn. Noelle then asked Ragna about the girl she had just seen. She questioned why she had suddenly teleported and how it was related to Hazama. She also asked who Terumi was, and why it felt like they had known each other for a long time. Noelle admitted she had no clear memories of her childhood, only faint fragments. She wondered aloud, could it be that Ragna knew something about her past? Ragna looked at Noelle and told her to stay away, asking her not to come near him. Noelle, calm and composed, looked softly into Ragna's eyes and said he didn't need to be so harsh. She stood up, no longer concerned with his coldness, and walked away, leaving Ragna sighing in frustration. At that moment, someone appeared. They asked if they had been discovered, but Ragna replied that their bloodlust had given them away. They were bounty hunters, arch-enemies, who had come to claim the Nilakanda grimoire. Suddenly, an attack broke out. Meanwhile, aboard an airship, numerous eggs were arranged neatly on a table. Yuki was calmly peeling one of them, enjoying his time. He remarked that the heir to Nilakanda was no mere myth. Picking up a phone, he requested to be connected to Relius Clover from the engineering division. The line rang, and a voice answered on the other end. They exchanged pleasantries. Yuki reported that Nilakanda had been inherited by Prime Field Number 12. Relius expressed disbelief, assuming Number 12 was a failed prototype. Yuki disagreed, stating the results had been impressive. He opened a drawer and pulled out Noelle's complete biodata. Yuki said that the monolith had been installed without issue and asked Relius to wait 3 more days until the cocoon was fully formed. He took a sip from his third boiled egg and declared that preparations for the Godslayer would soon be complete. Relius then asked about Yuki's plan to awaken the Murakumo unit within Noelle. Yuki responded that all that remained was to release the Bulwark Limiter, her arch-enemy weapon. Relius found the method dull, but was intrigued enough to want to witness Number 12 for himself. He declared he would go to Kagutsuchi. Yuki was surprised, wondering why Relius was taking action this time. But he understood, it was all a gamble. Relius was willing to risk everything on Number 13. Yet the true inheritor turned out to be the so-called trash, Number 12. Their conversation ended with Yuki asking Relius to come to Owasu, where they would discuss the remaining details. The situation was getting more intense as they moved closer to awakening the Murakumo unit within Noelle Vermilion. It would take immense hatred, enough to consume the entire world. And for that reason, Yuki would exploit everything, even the people they once held dear. Picking up the phone again, he reintroduced himself and asked about the condition of Major Kisaragi. The scene then showed Jean lying on a bed, his arms wrapped in bandages. Yuki instructed the person on the other end to summon First Lieutenant Tsubaki Yayoi from Squadron 0 and send her to the hierarchical city of Owasu. Meanwhile, Ragnar was still deflecting the enemy's attacks. Explosions and crashes echoed around him as he fought atop a narrow metal beam. The enemies realized that Ragnar was weakened, and they rejoiced, believing the true power of the Azure, Nilakanda, would soon be theirs. But in a burst of desperation, Ragnar leapt and unleashed a destructive force that pushed the bounty hunters back. Someone spotted him, collapsed and helpless. As they approached, Takaka suddenly appeared, interrupting them. She and Ragnar exchanged words, and Tao brought up Miss Toyu, triggering Ragnar's memories. He recalled a time when water flowed peacefully. Then came the explosion. He saw many injured, including Jean and Saya, surrounded by fire. Confused, Ragnar asked what was happening. But Jean blocked his path with a blade and struck him down. In a shocking moment, Jean even stabbed his own brother, causing Ragnar to vomit blood and fall to his knees, asking why. It didn't stop there. Jean mercilessly severed Ragnar's arm in front of Saya. Yuki Terumi then picked up Ragnar's severed arm and mockingly asked if it hurt. He taunted Ragnar, comparing him to a nun he had killed earlier, saying Ragnar was slightly stronger. Ragnar, in desperation, told Jean to take Saya and run. But Jean remained silent and coldly said that everything was Ragnar's fault. Terumi tossed the severed arm aside, turned around, and told Ragnar his name, then disappeared with Saya. Ragnar could only watch helplessly as his sister and brother walked away. Later, Ragnar woke up in an unfamiliar place, confused. He was surrounded by small childlike creatures resembling Takaka. It turned out she had brought him to Dr. Lychee's clinic. Lychee examined his battered body and asked Tao to take the others outside. As she looked over his wounds, Lychee guessed they were caused by an archenemy. Ragnar asked who she was, and she introduced herself as the Doctor of Orient City. She then questioned why Ragnar hadn't absorbed her power, which would allow him to heal faster. Ragnar stared at the ceiling silently as Lychee mentioned the Nilakanda grimoire. Suddenly, Tao returned, playfully grabbing Lychee's chest. Lychee scolded her for being so rough. Ragnar, still confused, asked if her name was Miss Toyu, but she corrected him with slight annoyance. Her name was Lychee. Lychee failing. Tao continued teasing until Lychee shoved her aside and, accidentally, she leapt onto Ragnar's chest. Ragnar cried out in pain. Lychee quickly pulled Tao off and reminded her that Ragnar was still injured and needed rest. Tao then sat sweetly by the bed and said she would stay by Nyaisu's side until he was better. Ragnar looked at her, baffled by her odd behavior. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Noelle sat alone, frustrated over how harsh Ragnar had been with her. She felt like a fool for sticking by him, yet couldn't stop thinking about him. Slapping her cheeks, she tried to snap out of it, reminding herself she was Second Lieutenant Noelle Vermillion. She convinced herself her feelings were just a phase and tried to forget every moment she'd shared with Ragnar, like the time she held his hand and hugged him. At the same time, from a ship, a figure in a thick red cloak stepped out, wearing a golden iron mask. Elsewhere, Jean had finally regained consciousness. Slowly, he dressed and grabbed his sword, but his body still looked fragile and weak. A piece of paper fluttered through the wind, soaring above a vast field of green grass, chased desperately by a girl who refused to lose it. She kept running, her eyes fixed on the paper dancing ahead of her. Just as it was about to drift away for good, it was caught by a blonde-haired young man wearing glasses, the student council president, Kisaragi. Holding the paper, Kisaragi turned to the girl and asked if it belonged to her. The girl thanked him and introduced herself as Noelle Vermillion. Kisaragi was momentarily stunned. He recognized her as the record-breaking prodigy during the Ars Magna aptitude test. In that moment, a vision of his younger sister, Saya, flickered through his mind, unsettling him. Noelle smiled again and thanked him sincerely. As Kisaragi handed her the paper, Noelle glanced at its content and flushed with embarrassment. It was something silly. Hoping he hadn't read it, she quickly ran off. The scene shifted. Hakumen stood engulfed in a field of glowing yellow light, sealed in place. Kokono, holding a blue lollipop, commented that Hakumen had gone too far in getting in her way. Despite being trapped, Hakumen struggled, summoning his strength to break free. He firmly declared that he would never take orders from anyone. But Kokono calmly noted that the device was specifically designed to restrain him. She added that she could erase Hakumen if she wanted, though she still needed the core component of his body, the Susanoo unit. In defiance, Hakumen mocked her, saying her words echoed those of her mother, referencing the bloodline she inherited. The perspective shifted once more, revealing 3 empty chairs and a girl standing before a voice that echoed with commands. The voice stated that it had been exactly 19,792 hours, 41 minutes, and 52 seconds since their last meeting. For them, it had been 283,875 hours, 18 minutes, and 24 seconds. The girl was Rachel Alucard. They questioned Rachel's decision to deploy the Ceponime unit. One of them responded that had she not intervened, everything might have been destroyed and divergence would have occurred. Rachel replied that they only wanted justification for releasing them, something she did not owe them. Another voice joined in, claiming Rachel had acted independently, but they understood why she had refused their terms. Rachel sharply responded, calling out the voice as the one responsible for unleashing Yuki Terumi from his cage. The shadow confirmed it, and revealed that preparations for the day of destruction were already in motion. Turning slightly, Rachel asked if they truly intended to destroy the world, but they denied it, claiming that they, the system known as Takamagara, only sought to guide the world onto the correct path alongside the successor of Azure. According to them, the world had descended into a cycle of fluctuating probabilities. One of them added that they would manage anything that interfered with the ideal future, even if it meant destruction. Rachel exhaled quietly, weary. She remarked that they were acting as though they were gods, crafting and controlling as if they were above humanity. But no human creation could ever match a god, not even the Master Unit, a force capable of reshaping reality itself. Rachel warned them about relying on Terumi to the very end, questioning whether they truly believed he was someone they could control. They replied that they did not control him, but they assessed him as low risk. Still, they would reevaluate. It became clear that Rachel Alucard shared a deep connection with Takamagara. They asked Rachel if she intended to return with them or not. Rachel responded that such an offer sounded more like an insult. Hearing that, they simply replied that it was merely a refusal to return, something quite logical. Rachel then said that the one who claimed to see everything was actually the one who was blind. At Dr. Lychee's house, Ragna was resting while the three little Tao sisters snuck in and tried to invite him to play, but he shooed them away. Tao then entered and told Ragna that it was time for the show. Ragna stared into a bowl containing a strange creature and asked if it was even edible. Tao proudly declared that the dish she made was packed with nutrients and urged him to eat a lot so he could recover quickly. As Ragna took a bite, the creature's tail dangled from the edge of his mouth. The food was hot, but not entirely bad. Meanwhile, Noelle was quietly gazing outside. Suddenly, someone called her name. She quickly stood at attention, saluted, and apologized, admitting she had been lost in thought. The person, smiling, removed her hood and asked if Noelle truly didn't recognize her. It was Makoto. Noelle rushed forward and hugged her tightly, joyfully calling out her name. She grabbed Makoto's fluffy tail, saying that this soft tail could only belong to Makoto. Makoto growled in slight embarrassment, asking why Noelle had to check her tail first of all things. They chatted for a while, though Noelle wasn't quite sure what to say. She was simply happy to see Makoto here. However, Makoto seemed concerned about something happening in the area. Noelle, confused, asked what she meant, and Makoto explained that the sky had become unnaturally bright and the ground was trembling. Noelle had no idea. It turned out she had been underground all that time. Makoto then said all of Kagutsuchi was shaking. Things were in total disarray, and no one knew what was happening. But people suspected it was Take Mikazuchi. Noelle asked what that was. Makoto answered that it was a Nox Nictors, a weapon used during the Dark War. It was immensely powerful, so much so that it had been sealed away. What startled Makoto was that this was something Noelle herself had mentioned long ago. Noelle then wondered if Tsubaki had something to do with it. She recalled the time when the three of them, herself, Makoto, and Tsubaki, used to study together. Back then, Tsubaki, the red-haired girl, had been reading about Ars Magus. Makoto had trouble understanding it, so Tsubaki patiently explained that it was all about the Nox Nictors, the sealed weapons. She told them those weapons were created by the 9 greatest mages from the 6 heroes, the most powerful weapons ever made. Tsubaki had said it was all elementary-level knowledge. Now that Noelle was a lieutenant, she remembered the day they went to the military academy library. Back then, Kisaragi had also been there. Makoto moved aside a pile of books and teasingly asked if it was true that Noelle wanted to be a secretary, considering her talent for Ars Magus. When she heard that Noelle genuinely planned to become a secretary, Makoto was surprised. At that moment, Kisaragi arrived, and Tsubaki approached, noticing Noelle there. The two exchanged glances, each feeling slightly awkward. Tsubaki asked Kisaragi what was wrong, but he merely replied that he was fine. Tsubaki was deeply concerned for him and continued to worry, even blushing when Makoto teased her. She tried to hide her embarrassment behind a sorrowful look. Now, remembering all of that, Noelle could only smile and say that those were such beautiful memories. She clutched the metal railing beside her and wondered what Tsubaki might be doing right now. Makoto, lowering her head, answered that Tsubaki had gone to Kagutsuchi. Noelle was stunned, but Makoto quickly reminded her not to be too happy. It was top secret, even for the intelligence division. Makoto reported that Jin Kisaragi had escaped from the hospital and was now on the run. Noelle was confused, as Jin had been severely injured, but Makoto explained that no one truly knew what happened. Brass suspected that Jin had fought back. Makoto then asked if Noelle knew what the Tsubaki unit was currently pursuing. It was the Zero Squadron. Tsubaki was in search of justice, as part of the execution unit. She had been ordered to find Noelle and Major Kisaragi and eliminate them. Aboard her aircraft, Tsubaki recalled the mission: locate Noelle and Jin Kisaragi, then kill them. She questioned what they had done to deserve this, but Yuki coldly responded that it was a royal decree. He warned Tsubaki not to show hesitation when she wielded her sword. He also mentioned that the branch office had already suffered losses, and both individuals were connected to Ragna. With resolve, Tsubaki drew a blade across her finger, letting her blood drip freely. She used it to activate a mysterious power, summoning a green circle with a wave pattern at its center. A massive sealed door opened. It was the sealed Armagus, Izaoi. Tsubaki never thought she'd need to unleash this power against her own comrades. Placing her hand on the ancient stone, she broke the seal. Visions of her past with Jin resurfaced, leaving her shocked. The aircraft landed, and her mission had officially begun. Meanwhile, Jin, barely able to walk, staggered forward. Rachel watched from a distance, visibly annoyed by his stubbornness. "This is too much, even for a so-called hero," she muttered. Just then, a cat appeared before Jin, one he seemed to recognize. Jin took a stance, ready for battle. That cat was none other than Jubii. Jin accused the cat of mocking him by using the name of one of the 6 heroes. But Jubii calmly responded that he had a message. The world would continue to turn for the sake of purity, and once reversed, the power to restore it would also exist. That was the power of order. Jin didn't fully understand, so Jubii explained that the more the power was used to turn the world upside down, the greater the danger it would bring. However, the power of order wasn't inherently good or evil. It simply depended on who wielded it. Before leaving, Jubii told Jin that one day he would face the one he truly wished to fight. And that person was Jubii himself. Elsewhere, Noelle and Makoto were still talking. They agreed to look for Kisaragi, and Makoto asked if Noelle knew where he might be. The name Ragna was mentioned, prompting Makoto to note that he was one of the most wanted criminals. Noelle felt foolish for having left Ragna earlier. Had she stayed, Jin might have appeared as well. Makoto then advised Noelle to go to the Kaka clan's base in the lowest levels. She warned Noelle, if she encountered Tsubaki, she should call Makoto immediately and not act recklessly. Later, Dr. Lychee appeared and noticed Noelle, who seemed visibly confused. Using Ars Magus, Noelle attempted to find her path and was surprised to find Dr. Lychee holding something in her hand. They exchanged words, and Noelle struggled to explain her purpose. She said she was looking for someone fitting Ragna's description. Dr. Lychee assumed Noelle was a bounty hunter sent to kill Ragna and immediately prepared to attack. Desperate to correct the misunderstanding, Noelle explained that she was searching for Ragna not under orders, but of her own will. Dr. Lychee demanded to know why. Noelle replied that Ragna had once saved her, and she owed him her life. She insisted that she wasn't who Dr. Lychee thought she was. With sincerity, Noelle kept trying to make her intentions clear. Noelle stated that she needed to see him, or something terrible would happen to the one she loved. She urged herself to believe in her own decision. Somewhere else, Tao kept feeding Ragna nonstop, leaving him bloated and overwhelmed. Ragna eventually shouted in frustration, asking if there was even a limit to all the food. Suddenly, Dr. Lychee entered, surprising Tao, who immediately asked if the doctor had returned home. Then, Noelle appeared from behind. Noelle began explaining to Ragna about something important that was about to unfold. Lychee scolded Tao for her behavior, causing Ragna to unwrap the bandages around his body. Everyone turned their eyes to him, but Ragna told them to stop staring. Rachel appeared out of nowhere, but only to say that all of this was meaningless. Tao crawled toward her, commenting on her pleasant scent. Ragna insulted Rachel, calling her a damn rabbit, to which Rachel retorted that healing a wound by using pain was foolish. Ragna, however, snapped back, blaming Rachel for everything. Tao was simply delighted by the liveliness of it all, while her little siblings sulked because they couldn't join the fun. Tao carried a stack of plates, declaring she still wanted to play. Dr. Lychee, turning to Rachel, remarked that she seemed quite close to Ragna. Rachel replied that what Lychee had been seeking was now right in front of her. Lychee then asked who Rachel truly was. and the girl replied she was an old relative of Kokono, who turned out to be a professor. Meanwhile, Noelle helped rebandage Ragna's wounds. There was an awkward air between them, especially as Noelle rushed the process, causing Ragna to grimace in pain. Ragna then asked why Noelle insisted on meeting him again. Noelle countered by asking about his connection to Jean Kisaragi. Ragna called Jean his enemy, and Noelle acknowledged that, but hinted there was something deeper. Ragna looked at her and pressed the matter, but still reaffirmed that Jean remained his enemy. He added that he would destroy the crater that Noelle had also seen. Noelle tried to stop him, especially when Ragna brought up Hazama. When she asked why, Ragna simply stated it was none of her concern. He then asked why Noelle wasn't crying and running away like before. Noelle firmly replied, it was all for Major Kisaragi. At the same time, another figure arrived, Hazama's advisor. This was the 13th hierarchy city, Kagutsuchi. Yuki declared that all the key players were finally here. He found it amusing that Noelle had ended up wrapping Ragna's body from head to toe in bandages, even covering the face of the Grim Reaper himself. Elsewhere, Jean grew more restless, eagerly awaiting the moment he could face and kill his brother. Meanwhile, Tsubaki wandered the city streets. Back at the heart of it all, Yuki laughed joyfully, thrilled at the thought of watching everyone drown in their sorrow. Rachel expressed her gratitude to everyone and calmly walked over to a chair at a table adorned with several teacups. Standing nearby was a tall young man who appeared to be her servant. He inquired about what had just happened. Rachel responded that it seemed they had already begun to make their move. The man asked if she was referring to Takamagara, and Rachel confirmed his assumption, adding that Terumi was involved as well. The servant noted that if Terumi was part of it, many unpredictable events were sure to unfold. Rachel silently agreed. He then asked Rachel if she truly felt at ease. She questioned why he would ask that, to which he replied that her current expression looked like a satisfied smile. Rachel denied it, saying it was merely a sigh, not a smile. The man apologized for his impudence. Rachel took a sip of tea from her cup and gazed ahead, contemplating that if too much time had been lost, the world would fall into a labyrinth of dreams, one without escape. Rachel then mentioned to the man that he must already be familiar with Nox, and he confirmed, saying it was the only method to restart the movement of time. He asked what Rachel planned to do next, and she said she would begin an inspection, because only by doing so could she clearly observe everything and truly smile. The man offered to assist Rachel, asserting that no one else could help her open the path but him. He refilled her empty teacup with more tea. Meanwhile, Kokono contacted an operator and demanded a response from Tager. Tager replied that he was currently within 200 meters of the Kagutsuchi shelter zone. Kokono seemed skeptical and asked for a situation report. Tager informed her that Hazama and Relius were closing in on Kagutsuchi. Curious, Tager asked who Kokono's target was. She stated that it might be the Azure successor, Noelle Vermilion, whose next mission was to be captured. Tager was confused. Why her? Kokono explained, albeit reluctantly, that although it might seem pointless, the elders of Sector 7 had demanded Noelle's capture due to her connection to Ragna the Blood Edge. Tager couldn't fully understand, but Kokono continued. It wasn't about what they wanted. It was about stopping Magus's actions, and that meant complying with Sector 7's orders. She explained the organization's goal to reshape the world for the better. They had already narrowed their analysis down to 5 stages, using their theories to identify someone like the Azure successor. Still, Kokono found it all incredibly foolish. She stated that they had to block anyone from making contact with them. Kokono would handle the Nox herself and assign Tager the task of capturing Noelle. Tager agreed, but he asked what they would do with the Azure successor. Kokono said not to waste time on someone greater than the successor. Tager, still curious, asked why Ragna was far stronger than the successor. Kokono replied that he was considered the ultimate successor, one who had never known failure. Others were simply too weak to face him. The transmission suddenly became unstable, and Tager could no longer hear Kokono clearly. Nonetheless, the command was clear. From Unit TR-0009, Tager prepared for launch. At Dr. Lychee's house, everyone was enjoying a meal together, with Takaka devouring her food enthusiastically. Lychee mentioned that Noelle was part of the NOL and had spent a considerable amount of time with Ragna the Blood Edge. Noelle admitted it, but as she looked at the weakened Ragna lying on the bed, she said there was something she needed to ask him. Ragna was barely conscious. Suddenly, Takaka surprised Lychee by asking if the food was for her, behaving like a cheerful child. She then leaped onto Ragna's bed, spilling food all over his face. While Lychee changed his bandages, Tao asked if Ragna still wasn't feeling any better. Takaka offered to take Ragna to the Kaka clan, claiming they had a miracle medicine passed down through generations that could heal both physical and mental ailments. She seemed genuinely hopeful that Ragna would recover. Lychee, however, dismissed her words as nonsense. She pointed out that while Tao had indeed lived at the Kaka village for some years, she had never spoken of such a cure before. But Tao insisted she only wanted to share this secret with Ragna, whom she saw as a good person, unaware that the good person she was referring to was Ragna the Blood Edge, wanted by bounty hunters. Ragna grumbled that he had no interest in going. But then, Noel stood up and said they should all go. Ragna refused and told her to go alone, but Noel challenged him, saying that if he really wanted to recover, why not at least try? Lychee was suspicious of Noel, but Tao eagerly confirmed the place's existence, calling it a powerful and miraculous healing site. Rachel then appeared, silently observing them. When Tao asked about her journey, Rachel ignored the question and simply said she wanted to go to the healing place too. Suddenly, they were all teleported to a new location filled with towering rocks. Tao explained it was a hot spring sacred to the Kaka clan. Ragna cursed, "That damn Usagi for dragging them here." Tao magically changed everyone's clothes into swimsuits, revealing she was, in fact, a cheerful young girl. Everyone was confused about the sudden wardrobe change, but Tao cheerfully explained that swimsuits were mandatory in this hot spring. Without warning, Tao pushed Ragna into the water. Rachel and the others followed. Rachel looked at Ragna and said she believed he understood. Guy and the other animals nearby commented that Rachel's true motive was to help Ragna heal. Rachel, annoyed by Guy's babbling, smacked him, sending him flying. As Ragna submerged and then resurfaced, he looked up and saw Rachel's face, but accidentally called her Usagi. Embarrassed, Rachel turned away, saying this was just as shameful as she'd imagined. Meanwhile, Noel, Lychee, and Tao chatted on the shore. Noel seemed uncomfortable in her swimsuit, but Lychee complimented the outfit, saying it looked good. Though she'd been skeptical at first, she suggested they enjoy the moment since they were already there. Tao, as playful as ever, suggested they could all go skinny dipping instead, which shocked Noel even more. Rachel smirked and commented on how Ragna was always surrounded by eccentric women and said his life looked pretty fun. Ragna looked at her, then glanced at the three women, and admitted that maybe she was right. Noel, still uncomfortable with the situation, complained about wearing a swimsuit in front of a man. Rachel cast a spell to cover Ragna's eyes and asked Noel if that made her feel better. Takaka hugged both Lychee and Noel and jumped into the water. Ragna remained in the spring with his eyes now covered by floating red roses. Noel accidentally swallowed water, but Tao reassured her that Kaka springs contain 120% healing properties from Kagutsuchi, so drinking the water actually boosts one's energy and makes them feel happy. They soon found themselves sitting on Dr. Lychee, whose curvaceous figure stunned everyone. Yet Lychee remained composed and told them she was fine. Dragging them closer, she offered them more water. She cupped it in her hands and gave it to Noel, who was hesitant at first. But upon tasting it, Noel found it delicious. Lychee drank it directly herself and agreed. It was incredibly tasty. Meanwhile, Ragna, unable to see anything, grew frustrated. Tao grabbed his hand and tried to pull him toward the water source, but Ragna resisted. Rachel told him that once he was healed, he'd be able to do anything. By then, Noel had already put her clothes back on and said she no longer wished to bathe. She pressed a button labeled dry. Suddenly, a violent current surged, spinning everyone into a whirlpool. Screams echoed as they were swept away. As night fell, Rachel returned to her estate, where her loyal butler was waiting. The butler remarked that the azure connection between Ragna the Blood Edge and Noel Vermilion appeared to be growing stronger. He added that everything seemed to be progressing exactly as Rachel had planned. Ragna walked forward with Noel following closely behind him. They seemed lost, while Noel's thoughts drifted to Tao and Dr. Lychee. But Ragna had only one goal in mind, to return to the Kaka village. He didn't even know what kind of place they had ended up in. As they continued moving, a sudden noise startled them both. A pack of creatures appeared to be approaching. Ragna instinctively drew his sword, preparing to strike, but before he could act, Noel lunged forward and activated her power. Her bulwark materialized, twin guns forming in her hands as she opened fire. Ragna was stunned by the sight before him, watching as Noel unleashed a barrage of shots that struck the oncoming beasts. Still overwhelmed, he couldn't fully grasp what was happening. Noel then turned to him, asking why he was staring at her like that. But instead of answering, Ragna asked her if she already knew the truth. Elsewhere, Rachel commented that both of them were individuals who drew the attention of the Azure, yet they struggled to become one. Her hope was that they could unite, but despair, too, played a role. Rachel was convinced that nothing had truly changed, and there was no need to worry. Ragna looked at Noelle, thinking how much she resembled Saya, and that she, too, was connected to the Nox. He questioned what Noelle's true intentions were. Blue smoke began to pour from Ragna's arm once more. Seeing it, Noelle tried to approach, but he distanced himself from her. The ground split open beneath them. Ragna told Noelle to stop pretending. Without another word, he turned away and left, while Rachel quietly sipped her tea, deep in thought. She knew changing the world wouldn't be that simple, but she still hoped to find a way to make a difference. In another scene, Ragna lay powerless, his arm severed. Rachel appeared beside him and asked if he wanted to live. Without hesitation, Ragna said yes. Rachel snapped her fingers, and a thick, dark blue light enveloped his arm. She transformed the boy into the Ragna the Blood Edge. Looking up at her, he asked if he was the heir to the Azure. Rachel admitted she didn't truly know why he was chosen. Then, Ragna saw someone fall nearby and cry out for help. As he approached, the figure removed their hood, revealing a cute, innocent-looking face. Again and again, this strange encounter played out in his mind. Eventually, Ragna brought the creature to a small restaurant and bought her a bowl of hot ramen. She ate with great enthusiasm while Ragna silently watched. She introduced herself as Senna. Ragna suspected she had a split personality. Senna said people often told her she was slow-minded and added that Ragna could now call her Luna. Then, without warning, she snapped at him, calling him an idiot. When she realized Ragna knew Jubii, Ragna explained that Jubii was his master and asked if she knew him too. Senna shouted and accused him of being a lullicon. Furious, Ragna slammed the table, protesting the insult. Suddenly, the bell around Senna's neck glowed, and she whispered something faintly. Just as Ragna suspected she might also be part of Nox, she collapsed unconscious. A flash of light followed, and another figure emerged. A new persona introduced herself as Platinum the Trinity. Ragna asked if she came from the same egg. Platinum was pleased that Ragna could sense her presence. When Ragna asked what she wanted, she simply said she had no intention to fight, only to understand what was in his heart. She had something important to tell him, that he must face Yuki Terumi, and that without the Azure's successor fighting beside him, he stood no chance. Ragna was puzzled and asked what she meant. At that moment, Senna regained consciousness and resumed eating. After thanking Ragna, she walked away without another word. Tiger observed Ragna's condition carefully and quickly reported the situation to Kokono. After relaying the information, he stood by and awaited further instructions. Kokono, speaking through the communicator, told him to remain on standby. There was going to be a small meeting soon. Curious, Tiger asked what kind of meeting it was, but Kokono simply replied that she would send the next directive shortly. Just then, Tiger noticed Ragna emerging from a mysterious location. A sudden flash of light appeared before him. Nu had returned. The dimensional transfer process had completed. Something had been activated. Ragna glared emotionally at Nu, his expression filled with frustration and disbelief. Nu, unfazed, responded coldly. Order received and commencing execution. Her system activated instantly, and 6 iron blades emerged from her back, floating and poised to strike. Ragna fell to his knees in pain as the Null Ice Zvi-Dry system infused the blades with energy. Without warning, Nu launched a relentless barrage of attacks. Ragna quickly plunged his sword into the ground to dodge and retreat, clouds of dust erupting around him. He ran, attempting to escape, but Nu pursued him without pause, her strikes growing more intense. Suddenly, Ragna appeared behind her, sword raised, aiming for her neck, but she turned, staring at him as he shouted for her to stop. His blade hovered at the edge of her throat. Both were thrown back by the clash and locked eyes again. Nu stated this was now a physical confrontation, and a balance had been established. She spoke cryptically about dimensional constellations as a glowing red circle formed at the center of her body. She launched another assault, but Ragna wasn't trying to fight. He just wanted her to stop. Then, out of nowhere, she closed in and attacked again, creating a dense smoke screen that obscured the field. Ragna was thrown backward by the force. Elsewhere, Tiger observed the battle and asked Kokono if he should intervene. Kokono replied that this was Nu's matter to handle, instructing Tiger to stand by. Meanwhile, Makoto heard strange noises, brushing them off as construction sounds, but she couldn't shake the feeling it might be related to Ragna. Back in the battlefield, Nu slowly approached Ragna again, watching him finally rise to defend himself. Kokono, alarmed, commanded Nu to eliminate Ragna, but the girl stood still. Suddenly, Nu called out Ragna's name with an unfamiliar tone, startling Kokono. Was it possible Nu 13 still retained some memories? Kokono quickly instructed Tager to retrieve Nu. As Ragna moved to strike, Tager unleashed his power, neutralizing the threat and pulling Nu away. Before disappearing, Tager delivered Kokono's message. She hoped Ragna would consider cooperation. Ragna, confused, asked what kind of cooperation. Tager simply replied he was only relaying the message. Sheathing his sword, Ragna walked away. Nu, meanwhile, stood before Kokono, who now questioned why remnants of her memories still lingered. Elsewhere, Jean, still injured, was seen speaking with a fruit vendor, wincing as he held his arm. "I tend to piss people off," he muttered. His eyes landed on a nearby building, Shishigami Bank. The man inside, bearing a noticeable facial scar, remembered Jean all too well. He was one of the defeated Ikagura warriors, and he hadn't forgotten. The scarred man unleashed a full power blow, calling it the death strike. Jean collapsed again, unconscious. Meanwhile, Noelle walked alone, deep in thought. She remembered how Ragna once saved her. Despite being labeled an enemy, she felt he wasn't truly evil. Unlike Tsubaki, she believed in her own path. She caught sight of Lychee exiting a building and looked up to admire the sky, filled with bursts of vibrant fireworks. It was the New Year's festival, and it was beautiful. Suddenly, a tan girl shouted at her not to sneak in again. Noelle shook off the distraction. Now wasn't the time to waste. Elsewhere, Jean slowly opened his eyes and realized he couldn't move. A spell had been cast on him. Lychee stood nearby, and Jean asked why they hadn't killed him. After all, he was the one who caused so much chaos in the country. But Shishigami replied that Jean was his revenge target, and a true man wouldn't fight someone who was gravely wounded. Lychee then asked Bank to get clean clothes for Jean. As he left, she remarked that Bank was often called the Doctor of Justice and Righteousness. Introducing herself properly to Jean, he scoffed and said her treatment methods were far less efficient than a Magus. But Lychee calmly replied that while Magus used magic, she harnessed her own internal power. Morning had arrived. Jean moved his hand and realized he could move again. Slowly, he sat up and glanced at his sword, but before he could do anything, someone shouted that breakfast was ready. Meanwhile, Tsubaki was speaking to a fruit vendor nearby. She handed him a thick stack of money as payment. The vendor remarked in surprise that even soldiers could be kind. Tsubaki responded with a faint smile. Elsewhere, Ragna stood still, lost in thought, remembering something Rachel had once said to him. Jean ate his food enthusiastically and asked Bang whether he had lifted the spell. Bang laughed and admitted he couldn't provide food as luxurious as what Jean was used to. Then he offered to show Jean around the city. As they walked, one of Bang's subordinates greeted them, reminding them they couldn't afford to relax. Some children were playing with spinning tops nearby. When they saw Bang, they shouted joyfully, calling him boss. But the mood shifted when they noticed Jean. They accused him of being null and warned that if he laid a finger on Bang, they'd deal with him. Bang quickly calmed the situation, saying Jean was a guest. Yet one of the children angrily pointed out that people like Jean were responsible for destroying their homes and killing their fathers. Bang didn't deny it. He solemnly said that they had lost their nation and the people dearest to them. Later, Bang invited Jean to sit and have a drink. They sat down together, and Jean couldn't hide his confusion. Wasn't Bang supposed to be his enemy? Why were they sitting here like old friends? Bang explained that, while he was a warrior, he didn't want the people here, especially the children, to grow up filled with hatred and a thirst for revenge. With a soft smile, he told Jean he could explore the area alone. He trusted Jean wouldn't do anything reckless. After placing some money on the table, Bang left quietly. Suddenly, a voice called out from another direction. It was Tsubaki. Jean turned and saw her wearing the uniform, surprised. Tsubaki explained that she had volunteered herself. This was her duty as a member of the Yayoi family, a duty to humanity. She said she was going to serve the Imperator. Jean questioned her, asking why she had aligned herself with those conspirators. But Tsubaki responded firmly. Jean had left without permission and had committed acts of rebellion. He needed to take responsibility for his actions. However, she said if he came with her now, his punishment could be reduced. Jean, however, refused. He had something important he needed to do and couldn't return yet. Tsubaki asked if this was about Ragna the Blood Edge. Meanwhile, Ragna himself was climbing a long staircase, grumbling angrily. He swore to put that woman in her place the moment he saw her again. He was still convinced that Noelle was his enemy. The thought of Noelle consumed him, making it impossible to control his emotions. Overwhelmed with rage, Ragna punched a nearby iron wall. The impact echoed, but it didn't calm him. Without looking back, he kept moving forward. While Tsubaki was still trying to persuade Jean to come with her, Jean firmly replied that this had nothing to do with her and asked the girl to return to headquarters quietly. However, Tsubaki refused. No matter what, she was determined to follow through with her intentions, even if it meant forcing Jean by any means. She activated the Azaoi seal, revealing her power. Jean, knowing the risks, asked if Tsubaki understood the consequences of what she was doing. It turned out she did. Tsubaki explained that in the world she had created, no one else could see them. Then, she confessed the painful truth. Her mission was to kill Jean. But despite receiving a direct imperial order, Tsubaki admitted she could never kill him. That's why she used the seal, though Jean knew the light within Tsubaki would vanish because of it. Suddenly, a mysterious voice echoed through the space, catching even Tsubaki off guard. Her expression changed as she fell under control again. Just as Jean attempted to draw Yukianisa, the cursed sword resisted him. Before he could react, a blade pierced Jin's body, witnessed by both Tsubaki and the restaurant server. Jean groaned in pain, coughing up blood as he fell. Tsubaki's eyes filled with tears. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. Bank, who had heard the sound, rushed to the scene and was just as shocked by what he found. The scene then shifted to a mysterious location where 3 empty chairs conversed, commenting that the power of the order was being observed. Balance had been lost, and the order's strength had faded. However, Case 685 still remained, continuing its process. The timeline then rewound to an earlier moment, when Jean and Bank were sitting together in peaceful conversation. Bank admitted that though he was a soldier, he didn't want the people, especially the children, to grow up filled with hatred or vengeance. Unlike before, Bank didn't leave Jean alone. After paying for their drinks, the two of them walked off together. At the counter, Tsubaki appeared, calmly asking the waiter, the same one who had received Bank's money, to bring her a cup of tea. Elsewhere, a servant asked what had happened to Rachel. Rachel responded, saying that a world of false comfort had taken hold, and if romance were to blossom in it, things could become quite unpleasant. Still, she admitted human lives were, in some ways, quite fascinating. Meanwhile, Kokono stared into a brightly glowing machine and spoke with someone inside. Lambda. Kokono said she would keep upgrading machines if that's what it took to defeat Ragna. Under the full moon, Jean drew his sword once more, but a voice outside the room commented that the wounds Jean had carved were far too cruel to ever be undone. Back at the port, Bank asked Jean what had made him hesitate earlier. Jean, confused, didn't understand, but Bank warned him to leave the area immediately, as Null members were already searching for him. Jean asked if Bank still wanted to fight him, but Bank replied that he would only fight Jean once he had recovered. He knew Jean, in his current weakened state, wouldn't stand a chance. Bank's subordinates weren't sure why he was letting Jean go, but Bank stood firm. Once Jean was healed and no longer doubted himself, then they would settle things in a true battle. Bank also acknowledged that Jean was not a man to be easily defeated. He added that even his own master once saw the same potential in Jean. Jean silently wondered how someone like Bank could doubt him, until Ragna finally arrived. Meanwhile, Tsubaki appeared with a sorrowful expression, unable to find what she was looking for. Just then, someone called her name. She turned around to see Noelle standing in front of her. Their eyes met. Tsubaki looked shocked, but Noelle smiled, truly happy to see her again.